Hello, this is my Unit 7 presentation. Um, yeah. So at the start of this unit, my hopes were to carry on developing my style, something that I think got put on pause throughout Unit 6 because of the nature of the task. I also wanted to carry on understanding and developing my interest in people, places, mood, and atmosphere, as these are the things that tend to drive me to make better work. Um, to further my knowledge of my practice and the surrounding community was also a hope of mine. And last but not least, understanding my pod or point of departure was really important to me. Um, there was a time, probably around the ages of 14 and 19, whereby that's all I wanted to do was create political work and be politically active. I still am politically active in the protests that I attend, the media I consume, and the beliefs I tend to uphold. Um, but I don't tend to create political work anymore. Everything is political to an extent, but creating work that tries to talk about a world issue and my opinion on it doesn't seem to interest me as much anymore. I've become quite exhausted uh, through that way of working, and I think for good or bad, the energy I had for work like that came from like my teenage years. Um, yeah. Now I prefer to create work that takes me away from the media I consume. Um, it's like a breather from all the heavy stuff that's going on right now with the climate crisis, COVID, the BLM movement. Um, the list goes on, and I think sometimes everyone deserves a break from all of that. I think a break is healthy, and I'd like my work to be a part of that break for some people. Charlotte Ager once said in an interview, um, I want my work to function like a good book, and I couldn't agree more with that statement. Um, the work I create now, I would like to think, takes people away from the stress of daily life and routines also. Um, Even if it is only for 2 to 3 seconds on their Instagram feed, I find that really significant and quite important. Um, so I would class myself as an author slash investigator. Um, I like to investigate the people or places it is that I'm drawing and soak up as much of the mood and atmosphere as I can through taking pictures and surveying the area. I then try to output this in a more author style. I normally start with coloured paper and maybe collage some pieces that I thought were really important to the place, like a particular building or feature, and then I try to fit as much as I can into the page without oversaturating the image, I suppose. Um, so I started this unit by attending John Bentley's workshop, which was an activist workshop, which sort of contradicts what a lot of what I've just said. But saying this, I unintentionally came out of it with a piece of work that to me did tell a story. Um, I even asked in the workshop if the work had to be political, and the answer was no. So it tries to tell the story of my experience in lockdown and what a lot of my friends have been experiencing too. It's quite an honest story, and it's something that I don't believe that many tutors would probably approve of me saying. Um, but it is the truth, and that's one of the most important things to me. Um, Becoming nocturnal in lockdown, particularly the winter one, has been a theme for me that's followed me and my friends through the whole thing. And I think it would start with sort of one late night followed by an early night, but you couldn't get to sleep because of the night before, and so this vicious cycle sort of continues in this spiral like way. Um, Yeah, so mid lockdown, I found myself waking up at stupid times and going to bed at equally stupid times. And I use the term animals as a reference to the way our lives have been simplified into basic chores, like eating, working, sleeping, as all of the culture that we normally surround ourselves in has been taken away from us. And there are two figures in the design simply because everyone is living lives without the normal social bubble that they normally have, which tends to be bigger than two. Um, yeah, so this process that I've used to make the images stayed with me through this whole unit, and it's something that I've really enjoyed. Um, yeah. So this is Joe's workshop, which I really enjoyed, but I didn't really like the outcome. I liked the process a lot. I didn't find a way of sort of implanting my interests into the work as much as I normally like to, but I did make a reference to Daft Punk, which was fun, and it sort of ties with my interest with people and pop culture, as they've recently broken up. Um, so this then was Patrick Cole's Mask workshop. Um, this is where sort of the idea for the rest of my work came from. Um, I created these two characters called Joe and Joanne, inspired by the saying "average Joe." A big part of my interest in people come from my interest in what the majority do. I find the everyday life of normal working people really fascinating. I wrote this about Joe and Joanne's. Uh, I wrote this about Joe and Joanne. This is my description of Joe, at least. This is Joe. Joe is slightly tired from his 9 to 5 online job, which he wakes up precisely 8:55 a.m. for. He stays up too late on his phone, scrolling TikTok most of the time. Beers are also getting opened a lot sooner than normal, but normal is a faraway land now, and this repetitive blur is a reality now. Joanne's lockdown life is very similar if you swapped the drinking for virtual yoga classes. This was all totally fictional, but came from sort of my subconscious, which is normally being filled up with what people are saying on Twitter or Instagram, or what my friends have been telling me or sending me. Um, yeah, and that's just where that sort of small story that I built came from. Um, so I want to tell real stories from real people. So I dived into some research, to sort of try and deflect, not deflect, to support what I'd been thinking of Joe and Joanne, to have something more concrete. So I asked all of my group chats what had changed for them and what affected them through lockdown, and I got answers like sleeping patterns being terrible, insomnia, anxiety, having gone to the roof, drinking and using drugs more, and the whole week being one big blur. I researched these points further through some secondary research and trying to find stories from other people about the things they've experienced in lockdown. Um, in no way was I setting out only to have sort of negative um, points, but very few positive points did come from my research and my friends, which I think says something about lockdown in itself. Um, what I found was a lot of my friends had been saying was backed up by studies, um, like the drinking one, where 3.6 million more of us have now joined the higher risk category for our drinking habits since lockdown began. Um, yeah. So then from that research, I repeated the same process that I used in John's workshop, and created more prints in the same layout and style, using the same colours, because I mixed the nocturnal animals prints together, which made it quite an interesting print. So I thought I'd stick with those colours and bring them over to 4 more points. Um, I was happy with these, but I felt like a part of me and my style was missing slightly from it. Um, so they remind me of two things. They remind me of a piece of screen printing that I did last year, and you can see like the font that I've used is the same. And also, somebody told me, and I really agree with them, that those prints remind me of, or remind them of road signs. think because of like the bold symbols that they both use. Um, yeah. So then I develop these designs, but sort of add in a lot more color and also utilizing colored paper, which is something that I'm really fond of, um, to print on and to cut shapes out of also. Um, Instantly, by looking at these, I know that they feel more recognizable as my work. I probably owe this to the colored paper. Um, I'm not really sure why, but when I use colored paper, I feel a lot more comfortable. It's almost as if white paper can tend to intimidate me a little bit sometimes. And also, a lot of the color palettes came from existing work, so I've sort of brought them over into these designs. Something that I hadn't used was any colored pencil, so I decided to use some of those on another round of prints. I'm calling it a round because that's how the process seemed to me. Um, and I think a lot of the results were really interesting. I think they brought about some much needed texture, but they also don't really work for some of the designs. I would say the Blurry Days one, I'm not really sure on that one, but interesting all the same. Um, so I think a mixture of all of the second round and the third round of prints are probably the most successful, which I will show that mixture. Can I look at that? There we are. So I think my outcome and the process in which I use to get to those outcomes proves my position as an illustrator. I'm an investigator and author type of illustrator, and I think the research and the type of research I did proves the investigator in me. I wanted to find out more about how people have been living in lockdown, and I had my assumptions based on things I've seen on social media and in the media, but nothing concrete. Um, After I did my research, which I think went really well, and it was really interesting to find out from friends in a more formal way what had been going on for them, I then tried to commentate and translate all of that into something visually appealing, which is the author side of me. Um, I know social commentary can be seen as political sometimes, and I would agree, but I don't think I have an interest in trying to get my opinion on world issues and out there at the moment, and instead I like to try and show what the majority of us do to fill out time, and then let other people pick out political points from that. Um, yeah. In terms of answering my hopes for this project, I think I did well. I wanted to develop my style, and I think I did this, but perhaps not with my primary style, as you can see on the bottom row of pictures. Um, I'd call the printing um, style sort of my secondary style. Um, they both have similarities, and in no way are they completely separate from each other, and I wouldn't like them to be either. But they do obviously look slightly different, and that is I think that's down to the process more than anything else. Um, I'd say it's fairly common for illustrators to have more than one style, though, which all depend on the processes, materials, the subject matters, and the way of working. I think Charlotte Ager, who I mentioned earlier, does tend to have two styles. Um, she has her editorial style, which you can see on the left, um, which is more considered with colors and form and composition. And then she also has her reportage style, which is obviously more intuitive and spontaneous, with the mark making particularly. Um, and I think having this approach is healthy for me and refreshing. Um, it feels it feels as if my tool palette is like wider because of this. Um, I continue to learn about my interest in people and places, in this came, which in this case was just people's homes. But I didn't learn more about mood or atmosphere, unfortunately. But that's expected to be expected with this topic. Um, I definitely learned more about the community though and other artists, but perhaps not as much as what I'd like to. In terms of understanding and exploring my pod, I think I did well. I plan to go over some of the other workshops over the Easter break to further my learning of my own pod and also the other ones. Um, I do feel like I touched on my pod in Unit 5, but without knowing it as a pod, and instead just a way of outputting my interests. Yeah, overall, I'm really, really happy with how I worked in this unit, and it's been really, really refreshing to be working in this way again after Unit 6. Um, Thank you for listening. Bye.